Thank goodness. Okay, so we should be live. Wonderful. Okay. Can everyone hear me again? Am I muted? Nope. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to, first of all, thank you guys for coming here today. I really appreciate your time and all of your input. You guys are all spiritual workers and have a beautiful energy. And this is something that you guys are all passionate about. And so even though our paths are all different, I think that it's really big that we come together to start these conversations. And so today we're going to be just opening a conversation around spiritual bypassing and the repackaging of racism. So this happens quite a bit with racism. I feel like it's always getting a facelift to be new and trendy. And right now it's being repackaged as spirituality and as witchcraft and as mysticism and as new age. And like when you unpack it, it's just good old fashioned racism. But that's how it continues and like furthers white supremacy. And people that don't know and don't have that awareness or that race education, they won't notice it. And like even I've had people message me and say like I don't see really what's wrong with this, or I don't hear what's wrong with this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if we don't open these kind of conversations, then people don't like gain that awareness to see what's happening and how it's hurting other people, and how being complicit and being silent on it furthers these type of hurtful things. So I really appreciate all of you. And I think we'll just go around the square and you can introduce yourselves. And I know that everyone has different talking points. And so let's just get started. Yeah, do you want to start, Vivi? Let's go around and do introductions, then we'll come back to you and you can start with your talking points. Okay, I'm muted now.
Just pretend I'm not here. I'm waiting for it to catch.
How do I change it?
I'm waiting to see if it catches up, if I fixed it or not.
They can't hear us either. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why, because I can hear all of you guys, so I'm just trying to figure out what's going on, because I can see us on my phone here. No sound. Okay, so now they can hear me. So I don't know. Let's see here. Am I sharing the sound on the device that's recording? So Zoom or... let me look here. Luckily that these guys are all Zoom pros. So let's see. Am I sharing sound from here? They said to check if I'm...
That's what I was gonna look.
Oh, okay. So take my headphones out, maybe?
No, don't. No.
Okay. Okay.
Working on it.
Now, can you guys hear everyone?
Testing.
Test.
I hear Panda.
You can hear
I
me?
hear
You hear
Yvonne.
Panda? Yep. I can hear you,
Can you hear me?
Giovanni.
Testing.
Yep, I can hear you. That's awesome.
Testing.
Yep.
Hello?
Yay.
I hear Vivi.
Okay,
Good
so
day.
it says we can hear now. Perfect.
Yay.
I think we're there. Okay,
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I thought that I had this all down. Okay, perfect. In case I was talking and no one could hear, all of these beautiful humans are here to open a community discussion around spiritual bypassing and the repackaging of racism. We have Vivi Varon, Dr. Giovanni Washington, Samantha Osborne of Very Good Intentions, David Davis of Porous Palms, and Yvonne Abero, and she is a multiple author of Inclusive Wicca. So I think that's just really quick what you guys missed when we didn't have sound. So I'm really sorry. I'm trying to resize the screen so you can see everyone and then hear all of us. So we just wanted to open this conversation because that's how people learn and you grow and heal. And that's what true spirituality is. The dangers of repackaging racism is that people often don't realize or recognize what's going on. So we've seen this happen in the Norse community where white supremacists have appropriated a lot of their symbols and are basically saying that this is what it is. And the Norse community has had to push back really hard against that, saying like, no, we're not with them. That's not what this is, that kind of thing. And so now it's creeping up in with people calling themselves mystics or, new age witches and that kind of stuff. And it's just good old fashioned racism. And so I just wanted to kind of open that conversation, and everyone here does different spiritual work. Our paths are all different, but we're a community, and thank you again for joining me. Thank you for putting up with the technical errors. So Vivi, I know that you had some different bullet points that you wanted to speak on. If you wanted to just go ahead and start.
Sure. Okay, so I do identify as a mystic, and I do find that I have a lot of overlapping circles in like the New Age community. And I do see a lot of this spiritual bypassing. And I think a lot of it happens from misappropriation of certain things and also a bleed over of some Christian supremacy. And I say that because my culture is Judaism. That's the culture I come from. And that is like my ancestry has been like resisting converting to Christianity. So I tend to notice a lot of this stuff. So one example, okay, I'm just gonna actually talk about how social justice is baked into my culture, and how it is. Okay, so there's the concept of chesed. Chesed is loving kindness, right? And that's a big thing in Christianity as well. And it's a big thing in many different monotheistic cultures, and I'm not as familiar with more earth-centered cultures, so I can't speak to that. But chesed is loving kindness, and a lot of times I think people only lean on loving kindness to heal the world, but that doesn't treat the systemic issues. And so in Judaism, we don't just have chesed, we also have tzedek, right? These are all emanations of the Jewish God. And so tzedek is justice. And you can't really have chesed without tzedek, right? Loving kindness doesn't work without justice. I've heard someone describe it as you have to kind of swim upstream. You treat people with love, right? Love and light. But also you have to look at the systemic issues and break them down. You got to tower the shit out of them. And so that's, yeah, so those are intertwined. And, there's a lot of Kabbalah that you see appropriated in the New Age community. And it's like a lot of times in the history of Kabbalah, it started in Spain. You actually had Christian mystics take it and then try to repackage it and sell it back to Judaism more as like a centered around Christ consciousness, right? And that's just, I love Christ consciousness, but that is just chesed. That is just loving kindness, in my opinion. And so that, I don't want to take up more time on that, but if it circles back around, I want to talk about how things like the term avatar have been appropriated, and how like meat suit, right? And how things like the Holocaust get brought up a lot. But I'm going to pass the ball, I guess, to Yvonne next. And if it comes back, I'll talk more.
Well, bouncing off what you just said, I think in Indigenous people in Canada, where I'm sitting, on the land of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Atawanaron, they quite often say, there is no reconciliation, because reconciliation is a big thing. You cannot have reconciliation without truth. And so I think that ties in very nicely with what you just said about there's no, and also the Black Lives Matter movement, no justice, no peace, right? You can't have peace without justice, because justice is the foundation of peace. So yeah, the thing I wanted to bring to this conversation was that I've quite frequently expressed anger about, social justice issues, social injustices of various kinds, whether that be LGBT people being oppressed, or trans people, or Black people, or Indigenous people, or whatever. And there's been some person, and then I will get angry about that thing, and then the other person will say, oh, but that's not spiritual. And I'm like, give me a break, because you cannot have peace without justice. And it's sort of like, oh, my mind is on higher things, sorry, I can't think about that right now. I'm like, what? I got into this whole spirituality malarkey because I think it's the whole point is to raise one's consciousness in order to help heal the world. Tikkun Olam, right? So that's why I got involved. So anyway, I think I probably said enough, so I will hand it over to Giovanni, who is under me on the screen.
Well, there's so many things to say. Where to enter. I am seeing a lot of this in the Oracle deck world, the tarot deck world. And it's just purely with images. I ordered an Afro-Cuban Oracle deck several years ago, fully expecting to see Black deities. And the deities were white. They were like glow in the dark white. And it was shocking. And I mean, Afro-Cuban, like African was in the title, and the deities were not Black. And so that's one of the reasons that spurred me on, and I created my own Black goddess within Oracle deck, to sort of decolonize just images and imagery, because so much information is passed in images, there's cultural mores, societal values, like all these things are just packaged into, and we're creating more images than we ever have. Like I saw some stat that we've created more images in the last 12 months than we have like in all of the creation of images, in all of time, basically. And we're creating them more and more and more. And I think we have to be really, really cognizant. And that's where I see it. That's where it hits me the most. And I think particularly, Yvonne brought up the Black Lives Movement matters. And the thrust behind this deck is really, I want them to stop killing Black people for no reason. And I could go into the history of colonialism and how Africa was broken up and how the European powers came in, they split it up and they've owned it, and how they demeaned and dehumanized Africans in order to say they were savage so that they could justify their same with indigenous people here and in Canada. So we could justify the killing and the genocide and the enslaving of them. Like all of that happens, but all of that is baked into why we now see African deities showing up as white people. Like it's all completely connected. And it's a rabbit hole. I can go down and down and down. But there's I think it's incumbent upon us to create and demand, like we want to see demand diversity and not honestly not just diversity, but demand like the things that are missing. It's not like a mix. Don't mix up the things, the Black and indigenous bodies with the white bodies, like actually just, I want a Black deck, I want an indigenous deck, I want an Asian deck, I want whatever it is. Like we have to create the demand so that the people who are creating will provide. And I will pass to David.
Before we pass, Yvonne, I can't figure out the tech of it. My husband's over here like on the floor, like trying to do all the buttons, but we're trying to like compress the screen. Can I just have you scoot to the side so we can fully see you? Join us over here. Other way. Yep, other way. There we go. Because I can't figure it out, and I'm sorry. But here, you're fully here, and okay, we're still working on it, and anyways, go ahead and keep going, you guys.
So it was, just piggybacking off of what everyone said so far, especially the points about sort of justice and sort of peace and sort of loving kindness being sort of intertwined with one another. Operating from within like a Hoodoo cultural framework, there is, retribution. The tradition and the culture was born out of oppressed people trying to no longer be oppressed by any means necessary, right? Like, so if that meant whether that was protection, so defensive, or going on the offensive, like whatever that looked like, whatever that needed to look like, you would do that. And there wasn't this love and light, like turn the other cheek, to speak to the sort of like Christian supremacist language. And as someone who, in my spiritual practice, not only did I grow up in church, but even though I no longer identify as Christian, in my practice, I still use a lot of like Protestant Christian language and symbolism. So I have that, I'm engaging with it, but I have that like distance from it. And I definitely see it popping up a lot in some of the, among some of the more like as mysticism becomes, I guess, more mainstream, and it's becoming sort of less taboo for like people who do identify as Christian to lean more into like the mystical elements of Christianity. So they're bringing in this sort of like this watered down version of Christ consciousness, because Christ was flipping tables and like cussing people out too. So like this idea that he was just like love and light, I don't understand where that comes. Well, I understand where it comes from, but it doesn't make any sense. But so they bring this sort of like watered down version of it. But I'm like, in my practice, someone wrongs you, it's not even about you wronging them back, because you're not doing anything wrong. You're defending yourself. You're balancing the scales. And to just mention the sort of like no justice, no peace aspect, like some things cannot be reformed, right? Like some systems, like you said, you have to like tower the shit out of it. Like it has to go. You can't sort of change the roots or sort of tinker with the roots of something and hope that something else grows in its place. Like if the roots of something are rotten, if it's racism, colonialism, misogyny, all of the isms and all of the bad stuff, that can't change. Like it has to be uprooted and replaced with something. And so I feel like that discomfort, that inherent discomfort that comes with that tower moment. People don't want to encounter that. They don't want to experience that. And no one does, right? But some people have a higher, they're more willing to deal with the discomfort because they know that sort of that equity is on the other side of it. But it's the people who are comfortable now, they don't really care to experience that, because why would they? Like, if you were absolutely comfortable and everything was for the most part exactly how you needed it to be in order for you to thrive, why would you want to see all of that crumble? But then there are the people who are like, so we can survive and, you know, thrive and stuff. So I think, yeah, I don't know where I started and ended with that, but I'm gonna pass it off.
Is it me?
Oh, I'm sorry, whoever. I'm sorry, I didn't follow the rules and name someone.
I think it's Samantha.
Okay,
Yes,
go ahead, Samantha.
Well, I have just two things because you guys have like covered so many great things. So, the first thing I want to talk about is negative positivity. That's what I call it, because what people do is they pick and choose what their positivity is about, right? So, they build this arena, and I call it their sphere, to where I have Black friends, so I'm not racist. I have this thought process, it's okay kind of thing. And they use that for themselves. And then when you bring up the ignorance or you bring up the arrogance of the conversation, then that's not love and light. That's not okay. I was just stating my opinion. And that's a huge, huge thing is, only using the positivity and the love and light for whatever they want to use it for. And I believe that drives from I call it white supremacy Christianity, is the love thy neighbor only when X, Y, and Z. The other thing you guys were talking about, so like with closed practices, and it comes with people wanting to do closed practices, even though they shouldn't, but they don't want to educate themselves on closed practices. So I don't want to do closed practices. That's not for me, but I want to be educated in it. So I know about it. So I know what I can and cannot do and what is appropriate for me. I feel like as a white person, it's important for me to say, is this appropriate? Is this something that is mine? Is this something that is valid for me? And if not, I'm going to educate myself so I know and move on. So those are my thought processes, because I think it comes down to, number one, arrogance, because a lot of people say it comes down to fear. I don't believe that. Oh, it's fear of not knowing or the fear of the unknown. As a psychic, I'm going to tell you, when I meet racists, the first thing I feel is arrogance. That's the first emotion I get as a psychic, is arrogance. The next thing I get is ignorance. So those are my thoughts. I'm going to pass off to Panda.
Oh gosh, I have to take a deep breath. So going back to the tower, so people always view the tower as like, we're the ones that is crumbling, right? And like falling away and this and that. Sometimes in the tower, you have to be the lightning. Like, we have to be the lightning and that force behind needed change. And like, I just feel like that's what we are. And so I'm always inspired when I get the tower, because I'm that lightning. We are that lightning. And if you have a true spiritual practice, it will be deeply rooted in anti-racism, because there was a time that anything outside of Christianity was seen as witchcraft, and it came from a group of people that was oppressed and ostracized. So it's inherently anti-racist. And so true spirituality doesn't dismiss other people's pain. Like, it's not, if you're going to say, I'm so ascended, right? Or you're this higher being, your spiritual practice shouldn't disconnect you from the people around you. And it shouldn't allow you to dismiss other people's pain and negate their lived experiences. And that's with anything. I think if you're a spiritual person, especially in this community, this field, this area, and someone's telling you like what you're doing is hurtful and you can't hear that, that's your ego and you can't hear them over that. But especially when people of color and oppressed people, marginalized people say to you what you're doing is hurtful and you can't hear that, then you need to look at your spiritual practice. There's more growth and learning to do. And that's true of everyone. I mean, I'm not perfect. I have more growth and learning to do, and I'm fully open to say that. But also that's a part of shadow work. And I'm so big in shadow work that I feel, for me personally, the love and light allows me to make it easier to slip into like performative spaces, like I'm so happy and everything's so great, and that's not always true, right? And so one of the big things that I see, like Yuan said, is that, you know, you get angry about something, and people often, spiritual people, are like anger is a negative emotion, right? It's not. It's a completely valid emotion, as all emotions are valid, especially when it comes from a place of like a legitimate place. So people often say, like, when I get upset about people being murdered in the street, people want to say like anger is like, what do they say? It's like poison. It's like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die, right? Well, anger is legitimate when it comes from a place of abuse and of pain and oppression. It's a signal. It's telling you that like that's safe. It's like signaling you, and you need to listen to it. There's something wrong with that space, and there's work to be done there, and it's a valid emotion. And so that's just I see a lot of that type of spiritual bypassing. I also, with the avatars and the meat suits and the light beings and the I can't be racist because I don't see color. That's it's still racist. Ascension and enlightenment that's not what it is. So the way that I pose this to people is that you would never say to someone, so like a blonde person, you would never go to a blonde person and be like, don't worry, I still like you, even though you're blonde. It's just your meat suit, right? You would never say that to a blonde person, because it's not inherently ingrained in you that blonde is bad or less than, right? When you say those statements, they're inherently racist statements. They're tied to race. You only say that about race. And it's just a repackaging of well, I don't see color, so I can't be racist, but I'm not going to do anything about racism and about the people that are being oppressed. It's just the spiritual form. It's just the witchcraft form. It's just the mystic form of spiritual bypassing. And I'm sorry. Now I'm all worked up. So somebody else can talk.
Can I jump in there? I think the whole thing about I don't see color, it's like it's erasing a really core part of who you are. Like, you know, black is beautiful, so why don't they want to see it, you know? And I guess sort of going back a few paces to something that somebody said, I want to say that a definition of white supremacy that occurred to me a few years ago, because I always used to think that white supremacy was like, you know, the really bad stuff. I always thought that white supremacists were the very bad people who go around, you know, marching up and down in dodgy uniforms and actually getting violent. And it took me a while to realize that white supremacy was the whole system of oppression, and even down to things like everything is organized for the convenience of white people, and it's not organized for the benefit of anybody else. It's all, you know, it's all like, okay, everybody says to me in Canada, like, oh, I like your accent. And I was like, well, thanks. But, you know, how about liking some of the other accents out there, you know, that might not be associated with a lack of melanin. And also, I think there's a couple of, one of the things that kind of that feeds into New Age spirituality and its appropriation and other and also the sidelining of social justice, of, like you say, legitimate anger about social justice issues. There's a whole thing of like, all spiritualities are interlinked and they're actually all the same underneath, and you know, there's like an underlying energy to all this stuff, and it's all the same. And it's like, Well, no, each spiritual system and each religion is situated in its own locale and culture and all that good stuff. And it actually comes, as David was saying, it actually comes out of the experience of the Black diaspora and the Jewish diaspora and all of that. So you can't just kind of go, right, oh yeah, I think I'd like a little bit of hoodoo in my Wicca, or a little bit of, a little bit of Santeria in my Wicca. No, Wicca is Wicca, Santeria is Santeria. You cannot munge it all together. And there's a sort of sense of like certain kind of new agey trope that says, oh, all of these things are tools in the Enlightenment toolbox, so the whole of humanity should be entitled to them. It's like, well, no, that's not how it works. You can't file the serial numbers off something and say, all right, I'm going to shoehorn this component into that clock over there. It doesn't work.
I also wanted to say that with the meat suits thing, so
yeah.
if we are all one, like this blows my mind. So if that's your argument and you don't see color and we are all one, then we should all as one be united against eradicating racism. Make it make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're making sense. They're not making sense, but you are.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Anyway, who wants to go next?
I know that Vivi had some more points.
Oh, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to jump on something you said, Panda, about you didn't say cultural appropriation, but you defined something else, which was like my practicing of, or one's practicing of a spirituality or a culture, when that erases the harms that have been happening with someone else, like when white people are practicing African spiritualities, with sort of no regard, like they're doing the study, they're paying the money, they're traveling to Africa, they're studying with a mentor, they're doing all the right things, but they refuse to acknowledge that it's appropriative, or that there possibly is an appropriation, and they refuse to acknowledge the hurt. Like if I'm in this, because this is real life, right? I'm sitting in a room right now, not in this moment, but recently, with 15 other practitioners, 13 of whom are white, studying with a West African shaman of a West African spirituality system. And the conversation is about it not being it's not culturally appropriation, it's not cultural appropriation. I'm like, there's a reason, like there are systematic reasons why this room is not full of Black people, right? And if we can't acknowledge that fact, and if we can't do and I think personally we should do something to restore that fact, we need to not just acknowledge it, but address and restore, then we're doing a disservice. We're actually creating another harm. Like it's a harm on top of a harm. So there's a harm in people not being there. It's violent. There's a violence in people not being there. And then we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist, which is another violence altogether. So there's always these like exponential violences that are happening that people are not aware of, and they need to. And I think this is, until this moment, I didn't really think of like that as a definition of white supremacy, but I think it's exactly what it is. It's like when you're advertently or inadvertently creating harms that need to be restored that aren't being restored. In your best of intentions, that's where the bypassing comes in, right? But I didn't mean to, or I didn't know, or I'm doing this out of love, or my favorite is, well, the ancestors told me, and I'm like, bullshit. That's not what they said. And so I'll close there because now I got mad.
Yeah. No,
whoever's next.
Oh my gosh,
get mad.
Yes.
Go for it.
and it's violent. Like racism is violent, and it's violent in so many ways. And I was just reading about this actually. So it's physically violent, right? And you go through the act of violence. Say we watch someone be murdered on TV. So there's a murder, the death of the body. And then the other part of white supremacy is that it goes through and it justifies, right, the death of the character. So it can justify the murder that it did. So it's like violence on top of violence, right? I got sent like a racist assault. It was violent. It was a 20-minute long gaslighting, dismissive, painful message. Then it came up behind me and they shamed me for how I chose to endure racism, right? And someone else even made a video, and in the video shaming me for how I received racism, not the racism, had no problem with the racism, but with a problem that I chose to speak about it and highlight it, adding more violence. And then in the description of the video that was posted online, it said, "I will not sell you down the river," which is an extremely racist term that originated in the mid-1800s, alluding to the selling of slaves down the Mississippi River to be enslaved on the cotton plantations. And like, these are the spiritual people. This is spiritual bypassing, and these things are violent on so many levels.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going off what Giovanni said. There's a thing in my take on taking part in other people's spiritual traditions. It's like, you can't just show up for the nice bits and you know, like, oh, I'm learning your spirituality, but sorry, I'm not going to actually engage in any allyship or accomplice. You know, I'm not actually going to show up to any Black Lives Matter protests. I'm just going to steal your spirituality and run. And so even if you're joining a legitimate group and getting the teaching from a legitimate teacher of that tradition, if you're not showing up and doing the work of you know, helping to further social justice for that community, then I agree with you. I think it's cultural appropriation too. And you know, can't be too great being in a room where you expected to be in a safe space and suddenly there's all these people who are not necessarily safe. So
I want to jump in if I can real quick. You guys are talking along these lines of, you know, people not taking responsibility. All right. So something that I've noticed is on my platform, I get a lot of, when I point out facts or I say something like America's built on white supremacy, right? We could find so many statistics that support that statement. But immediately I get like floods of, I'm a racist. I'm the one saying I'm making Black people feel like they're oppressed, or I'm telling Black people they should be oppressed because I said a statement that has factual information behind it. Now, when that stuff comes at me and I deal with those types of people, in the situation Panda's talking about, where she got that, I mean, she was pretty much verbally assaulted for her view. These people honestly believe that they are right. They are in the right, even though they have no facts. They have nothing standing behind what they're saying. And for me, as a spiritual person, as a psychic, as someone who is seeing all this unfold and trying to become enlightened and do my shadow work, I do not understand how they can sit on this throne that they've created for themselves and not see the facts that are in front of their face. And I'm told all the time that I am a race traitor because I don't, because I'm against racism, because I say the things that are blatantly in front of my face. So it's so like I'm getting angry because I when these things happen, it's like I feel like there's no way to get above it without people getting angry, and then they wonder why we get angry. And here's the thing, it's all yin and yang. You can't get my love and light unless you're willing to get the fury if you're coming at me wrong or you're coming at something wrong. You're going to get both. It's yin and yang. Sorry, I'm sorry about that's my spiel.
Yeah, Vivi, I know you had some more points that you wanted to go over. I'm super interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I love what everyone's been saying, by the way. Just like, you guys are all bringing up amazing points. And like, I want to jump off of all of them. But there's like so many, I can't hold them in. But like, so I heard, many of us heard the message that you received, Panda. And it discussed avatars, right? And called meat suits, right? And the term avatar, you know, we see it in the movie, we see it in our icons for our pictures. Like it's a term that we've collectively taken from Vedic religions, right? sometimes called Hinduism, like different sects of Hinduism. And so it's just like interesting when you think about that term. And the one story that I've heard that term is from the Bhagavad Gita, and that's about Krishna. Krishna is an avatar of the Godhead in that religion. And by the way, I'm not a guru. I'm not teaching on this subject. I'm just saying it's like interesting that it was taken from that, because in that story in the Bhagavad Gita, it's about a great battle, a righteous battle. And Krishna, the Godhead in this avatar human form, came and said to Arjuna, we're all Arjuna as we were reading the book, right? Bhagavad Gita. He's saying to Arjuna, you can't just sit back. You have to participate. You have to make things right. You have to stand up for justice, essentially. Though that, I don't know if someone from that religion would put the term justice on that. That's like me saying that. And I don't speak for that religion. So avatars. When you're using it, and also using the term meat suit, right? Meat suit is inherently kind of detaching from each of us. It's like kind of disrespectful also to each of us as, and I've used that term before too. I'm guilty of using that term. But many of us are disconnected from earth consciousness, right? And being a part of the earth, it's not just like a meat suit. That's just so like this, I don't know. There's divine in the flesh too. There's sacredness in that. Yeah. And sacredness and anger too. Like just everyone who's been saying sorry for being angry, I'm like, no, that's sacred.
Yeah. And that line of thinking to me has to strictly be built for racism, because if say this is just an experience, right? And you're, it's the earth plane and, we're just these bodies and that's not who we really are. So even if you believe that, then why wouldn't your body be more sacred? Why wouldn't you be even deeper into this experience and the world around you for this time around? And if we're all one, then why, okay, so your belief is that we're all one, there's no difference, between our meat suits, then why are you here? And then this other group of people are here and they're being oppressed and you're okay with that. It just doesn't, that line of thinking, that line of teaching, and it's growing. I mean, I see it everywhere. I see it in my witchcraft groups. I see it, on TikTok. I see it on YouTube, and I don't understand it. And it's just it starts like this conversation that we have right here, but then challenging racism is how it starts. Like, even if you challenge it in your own home, if you're at the dinner table, you're out to Sunday dinner with your mom and she says something that's like, well, actually that's not appropriate, like challenging it where you meet it. And then also, I don't really get this statement that again, it's just furthering racism. So like, people want to shame me for being public about receiving racism, and again, they're not upset about racism, but how I chose to receive it, and saying like, oh, that happened in private, it was a private conversation. Well, whether racism happens on a publicized national level, we should challenge it. If it happens in private, it should be challenged. It should be spotlighted and it should be challenged, because we're trying to get rid of it, right? Rather than treating it like it's Voldemort and we can't talk about it. Like, if someone murders someone in private, you never hear them be like, oh, I did that murder in private, don't talk about it. Like, why would you bring that up? I did that murder privately. It was a private murder. So like, why do you do that about racism, except for to protect and further racism? You should always challenge racism. You should always meet that wherever you run into it. I mean, keep yourself safe, but like, it starts with you and your interactions and your friends and your group, and you cultivate those, because otherwise you're creating safe spaces for hate to grow, right? I mean, it's hate, it's senseless hate. The message that I got and the stuff that I'm going through in the state that I live in, physically here, like getting threats and those type of things, it's senseless hate, right? I can get up and choose to be a kind person, or I can get up and choose to use a different kind of toothpaste or whatever it is that's going to make me fit in more, but I can't change the color of my skin. I can't. So at the end of the day, it's senseless hate, and it needs to be spotlighted, and it needs to be challenged. And we need everyone, especially the spiritual communities, right?
I think, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think I just want to bring up, because we mentioned about the whole sundowner towns thing, that some people didn't know what those were.
Yeah.
Can I suggest homework for all those watching this is go read Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations, because it gives an excellent outline of sundowner towns and Jim Crow and all of the various right up to subprime mortgages and redlining and all these different practices that perpetuated white supremacy. So go read that. It's an awesome article.
And I'll put that under the video too. If you guys have anything any resources and stuff, I'll make sure that I put them under this video, so the people that want to learn or get further knowledge can do that. Okay.
I think that this sort of sweep it under the carpet, no, mustn't talk about it, that happened in private. That's like how white supremacy protects itself, and gaslighting you and pretending that nothing happened and sweep it all under the carpet. And the thing there were so many things that struck me about that voice message, but the one that I really just sat there going, oh my god, was the one where she was trying to say that the guy who killed George Floyd didn't do it out of racist reasons. I'm like, what? Speechless.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all bad, but that was, oh my god. Anyway.
Yeah, and if we don't talk about things, even when they're uncomfortable, first of all, true spirituality and actual growth is always uncomfortable, and it's always messy. That's what it is. But if we don't talk about things, first of all, you can't affect change without first confronting things, right? But then also, if we don't talk about things repeat themselves or get worse. And so it has to happen, and it needs to just be the weird thing around it. We just have to keep doing it, and you have to press through it, even if you feel like it's uncomfortable. Because that's how it's gotten to where it is, right? Because people are like, oh, just don't talk about it. So it's almost not so much the evil of people, but also the people that stand by and do nothing, right? The people that let that happen. And it's spiritual bypassing. All of that falls under the umbrella of spiritual bypassing. And it's one thing when it's something that's said on the internet, but also it goes as far as watching people be murdered in the street, and it's all connected, and it's big, and we have work to do.
Yeah, I have a lot to say. A few weeks ago, or however long ago it was, I posted on my Instagram. It was in response to some TV show that had just come out, and it was getting a lot of flack because it was basically just it was just Black trauma porn. And then the question came up about who is this for? This can't be for us, because why would we want to see that as Black people? This isn't entertaining for us. So who is this for? And one of the many conclusions I came, because it was made by a Black team of writers and directors and stuff like that. And not directors, but that's another interesting part of that conversation. Regardless, it was made by that was the how it was advertised, this Black horror made by Black people. And one of the conclusions I came to was it had to have been made for white people who have this need to separate themselves from white supremacy. So the show is about redlining, and this Black family moves from the South. They move into Compton when Compton was still a white area. And
is that called Them?
Them, yeah. Oh, and they're just being harassed the entire time, physically, supernaturally. It's a whole hullabaloo of just BS. And like I said, it's just one episode after another of just Black people just suffering with no.
I cried and cried.
Yeah, it's awful. and like no retribution, no, just 10 episodes of just suffering. And I'm like, this had to have been made for white people who wanted a show to say like, well, I'm not that bad. You know what I mean? So like, I can't, or this happened, it was a period piece. It took place in like the 50s. So it's like this, you know, well, that was back then, right? I'm not that bad. You know, I'm not, you know, burning up people's lawns, hanging up black dolls in people's front lawns and stuff like that. I'm not doing that, so I'm not a racist. I'm not being physically violent, therefore I am not violent. And so I'm like, that's really the only conclusion that made sense to me, because I'm like I said, like this could not have been made as entertainment for Black people the same way like a Get Out was. Like that was messed up, but it was entertaining. Them wasn't. So I feel like there's this, and the point I was making in the Instagram post was Black pain, even if that was the goal, right? To sort of coddle white people into thinking like, oh, okay, like at least I'm not doing that. The point I was making was that Black pain will never foster white empathy. Like it's impossible. And I even made the argument that it is genetically impossible, because I'm like, if we as Black people can inherit trauma, right? If we've come to the conclusion in our current way of thinking that trauma exists in the body, it is passed down intergenerationally, right? Both via the actual blood and sort of just like via the community, right? Then what makes you think that the narcissism and the violence of the people who did those things back then did not also get passed on? And I feel like we're seeing manifestations of that in all communities, but since we're talking about the spiritual community, we're seeing it in that as well. This idea of like, I am happy in my sort of proverbial white picket fence area, right? Where everything is love and light, everything is familiar to me, everyone is familiar to me. I know the languages, I know the deities, I know the practices. And if I want to steal something, I can steal it and bring it back to my space. Like I never have to engage with it in its native space. So I can have this suburban, you know, metaphorical home with all this like, you know, beautiful mid-century furniture, but then just have like that random like Yoruba mask on the wall with like no connection to anywhere that it came from. But it's sort of like the artifact that you were able to steal and bring back to show how cultured you are, and to sort of elevate yourself above the other sort of boring people in the area. And not fully aware of where I was going with that, but
it is. Well, I would just like to highlight that back then, that was like a nice Sunday, like a fun Sunday to go watch lynchings. They'd like put on their Sunday best, they would get their kids, and they would go watch them hang Black people.
Yeah.
Like for a good time. It's like going to the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like put them on postcards, and that was normal, even going back to human zoos, right? In America, where Black kids in cages being watched the same way we would go watch like animals at the zoo. And so I'm like, if we inherited that trauma as Black people, and if other communities inherit the traumas of their respective, you know, pasts, right? Why do we stop there and not acknowledge that there is an inherent narcissism and violence that is present in white spaces and white bodies? And I feel like that's the sort of thing that people that people are tiptoeing around. And I feel like until that's acknowledged, we're never going to get anywhere, because we get upset when people deny us of our identities. Oh, I don't see color. No, I want you to see my color. My entire spirituality is centered around my color. Please see it. Like I practice a Black spiritual practice, you know what I mean? But it's like, they're not only erasing our identities and stealing those from us, they're not seeing themselves either. Like they're not willing to look in the mirror and say like, I am predisposed to violent, narcissistic behavior just by virtue of where I was born into, and the body that I was born into, and the society that I was born into. It doesn't make you a bad person individually, but it's definitely a collective sickness that needs to be addressed before anything can move forward. The oppressed do not have to change. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to do anything. We just have to survive and hopefully thrive if we have space to do so. It's not our responsibility to change the world. You know what I mean? It's
well, and I don't think we can. Like, and I'm
right.
so glad that you guys are all here today, because it's not going to change until white people can talk to white people. You know what I mean? They're not going to hear me. They can't hear you, you know? And because we've said that, like, you're hurting us. We're in danger. Like, all these different things. And it's out there now. I mean, you can see it. We've seen it. And it's not going to change until we can start, like, white person can talk to white people about racism. And but yeah, just especially in the spiritual community, I always think that these should be safe spaces, that people should be more awake, I guess they say, but that's not true spirituality. Like, when you're dismissing the pain and suffering of an entire group of people, and we need everybody, and it's so important. And so I want people to think about that, because, like, for me, like, people are like, oh, well, I don't want to be about that for my business. Well, I don't have a choice to be about that. Like, I woke up about that, you know what I mean? And, like, I have to, for my safety, and I have to, to raise my kids, and, like, I don't have a choice. And so then other people have to make that choice, So, like, I've even had, which is funny because, like, I'm me as an adult Black woman. I've had people be like, you're a business, so you shouldn't post things about racism. I said, I am a business, and we're in the business of being anti-racist. So sorry, but we have to start cultivating those spaces. And so I'm glad that you guys are all here today, because that's what we're doing. We're not providing safe spaces for racism. We're not doing it. We're done.
I want to jump in, because I want to say something that as a white person, white people have to educate other white people. It cannot be up to people of color. You guys do not, I want to say this, white people have done so many terrible things, and yet they're like, okay, well, you want us to change, so go ahead and explain it to me. I'll change when you maybe I will, maybe I won't. And that's the crap. That's the crap of it. White people have to go in, and not just out in the street with strangers. They need to sit down with their families. They need to sit down with their elderly, with their young. And if they are aware that this is going on and they're not speaking out, they are part of the problem. And I get people are like, I'm scared to talk to my dad. I'm scared to talk to my mom or my family or whatever. Then you know what? That's the problem. Because imagine how people of color feel. If you're scared to talk to your own family, imagine how people of color feel to talk to those types of people. And that's something that people don't think of. I think white people don't think of ever, is if it's scary for you, imagine how scary it is for a person of color. Because I can't even fathom that. I don't even have any idea in my head what that's like. So when I hear a white person make an excuse, that's all it is to me. It's an excuse.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in with that.
Yeah, and the excuses, gosh. And I was telling this to Vivi, like, before we went live, just, like, probably 10 times just in the last year, both where I live, from people that I've grown up with, and then people in, like, the communities that I'm in, from YouTube to tarot to Instagram to witchcraft, that, like, when they're trying to make racist points, or, like, and then their supporting material is then they reference the Holocaust. And, like, you guys, that should not happen. Stop doing that. It's offensive, and it doesn't hold the water. I don't think that you guys think that it does. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
that is indeed Wait, is my mic on? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
That is indeed like a false equivalence. Like any atrocity that's happened in the world is very nuanced, and it's like if you're going and very nuanced and very specific, right? And so if you're going to bring it up, like the Holocaust, it brings up like it happens a lot with political arguments, right? They call people Hitler, they call them a Nazi, right? And if they're not a Nazi, why are you calling them a Nazi? Because it brings up this false equivalence, and it also, for anyone who has suffered, their community has suffered from that specific atrocity, it's bringing up that imagery that they're either going to have to think about or compartmentalize and deal with later. So it's like you said, it doesn't really carry the weight that you might think it does when you bring it up. Like saying that Hitler thought he was doing the right thing, right? That from that message. No, he knew he was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
He didn't think he was doing the right thing. No, he knew what he was doing. And a lot of Chauvin knew what he was doing, right? So I just made a false equivalence, right? But like people who are perpetrating things know what they're doing. And sorry, I just started talking about.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do have a question, you guys. Someone said, what does holding other people accountable look like in an online space?
I think I'm going to use a personal experience, and it's super to the point. But I think calling them out, but being specific, right? Like I don't believe in the whole like you did or said something hurtful that was not only hurtful to me but hurtful to other people, and so we're going to have this conversation in private. I don't believe in that. I'm like, you were bold enough to make that statement, whether it was in private or otherwise. You know, I'm going to assume you have the fortitude to also accept this public, you know, the conversation, and any sort of thing that comes with that or from that. So just calling people out in real time as you see it, it's literally as easy as just leaving a comment under someone's post. There was someone, I'm currently in the process of educating myself about as a tarot reader, about the plight of Romani people, and sort of educating myself and sort of undoing a lot of the negative stereotypes and negative images that I had in my head, none of which were active. I wasn't just sitting around thinking about like negative Romani stereotypes, but when I was upon reflecting, I would be like this, when I think of that culture, these images come to mind, and those images are offensive. It's just subconscious because I grew up in this culture where the sort of whole, you know, exotic fortune teller thing is, you know, unfortunately a thing. And so there was a person on Instagram, spiritualist, they were using in their social media stuff, you know, referring to themselves as like, you know, the G word, right, with the Romani slur. And it's simple. In the Romani people who I follow, I saw that they had already commented under the post, but this person, because they had previous run-ins with these two accounts, they had sort of brushed them off and ignored their comments. So then I commented like, hey, this is a slur. She responded to my comments, but then I was like, okay, cool, thank you for responding, but you should also probably acknowledge the two actual Romani people who commented before me. And they ended up taking the video down, so I don't know what private conversations were had, knowing this person, doubt any were had. But it's just like calling them out, like the whole, we're going to do it in private because I have a business and you have a business, and I don't want people in the comments. Screw that. You posted it. It's public. I'm going to comment on it because you didn't disable the comments, which leads me to believe you wanted that engagement. So take it. That's how I would handle that.
Yeah, just leaving a comment. I always try to start from a place of like teaching, like, here's some resources, here's why, here, you know, as a Black person, I'm letting you know that like this is how this hits and it hurts, and you know, those type of things. But then also just like who you're supporting as well. So like looking at especially like the big spiritual people, the big tarot people, like are they talking about these things? Or are they more worried about their business? Like who are you giving your money to? Who are you following to and giving energy to? Because like those follows like on Instagram or wherever else, those follows monetize that account, right? So what type of work are they doing? And so I just got done talking with someone about like we spend so much time online, so like feel free to cultivate that space. If you wouldn't want that like energy, like if someone's posting like, you know, covertly racist things or like this and that, like block, unfollow, like cultivate that online space. And you know, it's definitely okay to try to educate people, but if they're not open to learning, you don't have to continue to submit yourself to pain, right? Like, you know, like with the message that I got, I had said to that person several times, like, what you're doing, like, is hurtful. It's hurtful to me. Here's why it's hurtful, you know. And if these are over exaggerated, would you tell that to the mothers that their children are dead? Would you tell that to George Floyd's mom? Like, would you say that to them, that it's just over exaggerated? It's just the media. Like, you wouldn't. I hope you wouldn't. I hope you're not that dead inside, because like it's like that's a loss of a life. And that's, you know, so like, but at some point then you can remove yourself, because you don't have to subject yourself to when people aren't open to hearing and to learning, to listening. Don't continue to subject yourself to mistreatment or to pain. But yeah, definitely looking at who you're following and what they're like, what type of work they're doing, if they're doing the work or if they're not.
And then can I just say that if you know, if people are following me who are, if you know, if I put up a Black Lives Matter post or a, you know, Indigenous related post, I've, you know, I don't want followers. If somebody unfollows me because of that, I don't want that person following me anyway. You know, if you're not there to, if you don't have those values, then obviously I'd like to try and get people on board. But you know, if somebody unfollows me because they're a racist, they're, you know, because they've got a racist attitude, then they can I don't
that's
want
good.
them to follow her. And no,
that's the work that, because like you made them uncomfortable, right? You made them uncomfortable, and
yeah.
Racists should have to feel uncomfortable, because oppressed people feel uncomfortable all the time. So
yeah.
then you're doing the right thing, and you're building a stronger community. And it's yeah. funny because I have people that are racist that specifically follow me, and it's, you know, I don't know what that is. Like they hate follow me, I guess. But like a guy that I grew up with, right? He told me as they were hanging Nazi flags in the Capitol, he wrote to me on Facebook, like came to my page, and he was like, I am so sick and tired of seeing you post about racism. I'm tired of seeing you talk about white supremacy. It's not real. Stop it. And I just like, I thought that like my head would explode. Like, first of all, we come from a yeehaw town of 500 people. So like, can you imagine like never leaving this small town and then like having the audacity to say like a whole group of people aren't oppressed? And then also we're watching them hang Nazi flags in the Capitol, and you're going to say that white supremacy isn't real. But like I've blocked him on everything, and like somehow he liked my post. Like I wrote about how South Dakota is still holding slave auctions in their schools, and how like this is now something that I have to fight for my children. And he liked that post, you know, because he doesn't see anything wrong with it. But like I'm doing the work, and the fact that he's perturbed by that, like he should be.
I really think that if people want to understand why they might be perceived as racist, like the first person you should go to is a white person who's like posting Black Lives Matter stuff, because you don't want to make a Black person do this emotional labor. Like that 20-minute message you got, like I wish there was like that I was the cushion, like that person came to me first, right, to talk about it, like, because I'm not going to be, I don't know, it's just like don't talk to her, talk to me first, and let's like say those things that might like be hiccups, and like I'll be patient with you. Don't ask a Black person to be patient with you when they're the ones like dealing with the consequences of your ignorance, right? And like I'm of course like not perfect, but I'm trying to listen and share and not be a white savior at the same time.
Yeah, and like anti-racism isn't about being perfect. It's just about like getting up and doing that work every day. And like when you meet racism, like challenging it. Like it's nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect, like for sure. And like I've even had people message me. I've had several people message me since one of my last posts, and they asked about like what sundown towns are. And like that's good. Like that's good that it's coming from like a complete place, like a kind place of learning. And I'm glad that these people don't know, that everyone doesn't have to know, but also that's like a part of white privilege, right? Like not having to worry about these things, not knowing what they are. So for anyone that doesn't know, sundown towns are places. This originated back, oh gosh, I don't remember when it was, but way back in the day during time of segregation, right? They were towns that like Black people could work in, but then they couldn't be there after dark. And there would be large signs that would say like no coloreds. And if you were found there after dark, you could be beaten and you could also be killed. The problem is that in 2021, there are still sundown towns in the US. And the problem with that is, well, there's many problems, but they're no longer labeled with great big signs that say no coloreds, right? So I just saw this video from this Black man that went hiking. He wanted to go to Devil's Bathtub and he was traveling by himself. And he ran into a sundown town and he stopped to get gas. And the only reason that he made it out was because the gas station person like came out and said like, I'll sell you this gas, but I don't know what you're doing here. You cannot be here. And like, you have to get out of here. You have to get in that car and like drive as fast as you can out of here. And you just don't even realize like how many levels. I mean, it's violent.
I've been, so I live in a sundown town. I came back from Arizona to a sundown town. And I have been that person. I have told Black people traveling through town, I've said, listen, I've stopped them at gas stations and said, you got to get out of here. This is not a safe place for you. And I had a person of color go, what do you mean? Because they were from New York. They had never seen this type of area. And I told them, I said, people will hurt you here. And they won't think a second thought about it. Yeah. And people ask me, why do you live there? And I say, if people like me don't live in places like this, how are they ever going to change?
Yeah.
I am safe to live here. Nobody hurts. Now, I have threats. Don't get me wrong. You know, I've told you something. I'm a race traitor. I'm racist. I'm whatever because of what I do and my beliefs. But nobody's going to come and hurt me because I'm white. That's just a fact. If I was a Black person saying the things I said, there's a good possibility I'd already be dead where I live. And I know that. And that's something that I think that a lot of white people don't realize. They may not even realize they live in a place to where if their skin was darker, they'd be dead. They don't have to think about it.
Yeah. Do we want to go around? I won't keep you guys from your whole afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at, but do we want to go around and just do closing statements before we go? We can start with David if you want to go.
Yeah. It's like a quick closing statement, and then just sort of as it's sort of piggybacking off of the sundown town conversation, but sort of expanding it into like the idea of safety in space in general, and just how important it is to create. I was thinking earlier about how, I promise I'll make this quick, but thinking earlier about how spirituality is becoming more mainstream. Like people on the radio are talking about like collecting moon water and stuff like that, like conversations that wouldn't have been had publicly a decade ago, not even. But how for Black bodies and marginalized bodies, those practices, those earth-based practices are still very dangerous to do, especially if you live in a segregated area, because it's one thing to see a bunch of like, you know, white girls in their cottagecore dresses, like in the woods, picking mushrooms and like dancing by the river. But like, I just want to go to a park and get some, you know, sumac berries, and like someone's looking like, what are you doing here? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I can't be outside. And so creating those like literal, like physically safe spaces, and I'm talking like social safe spaces and spiritual, but like physically safe spaces where people can just exist. I can just physically be outside without someone looking at me like what's going, why are you going into the woods? Why are you coming out of the woods? What's in that bag? But I'm like, oh my God, please just like, and thankfully that's never happened to me. But I know people who it has happened to. The Grandma Baby's Apothecary, who made a deck I loved, the owner posted about how they were just at a park, just sitting down with a cup, collecting rainwater for the full moon, and some white guy was just like staring at her the whole time. And she's like, hoodoo may be mainstream now, but it still isn't safe for us. And that's the case for a lot of indigenous and ancestral practices. It's like this, yeah, it may be cute when like one person is talking about Kabbalah, but like an actual Jewish person comes in and it's like this whole thing. Or it may be cute when a white person wears, a Native American headdress, but when an actual indigenous person does it, it's like, you know what I mean? So I don't know where I was going with. I never know where I'm going. I just kind of go.
I appreciate you though.
Thank you.
Yvonne, do you want to close?
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I sometimes walk down the street. When I was living in the UK, I would walk down the street and there was there were 3 or 4 black guys that were around on my street because they lived there. And there was one guy who always used to run for the bus, and because he was always late. And I just remember thinking, if he was doing that in the US, that could be bad, and for him. And there was another guy who, because we lived like a block away from the local mental hospital, and there was another guy who would literally stand about in the street, kind of swearing his head off, and nobody had a go at him. It was completely like, oh, there's that guy, hi. And I just thought, because he was black, and it made me think, oh, what would happen to him if he was doing that in the US? I mean, I'm not saying that the UK is in any way perfect, because it's not. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in Canada is if I go for a walk in the countryside in Canada, it's very diverse. There's hikers of colour, and there's a lot of different types of people. Whereas if you go for a hike in the UK, it's quite rare to see black people in the countryside in the UK. And there's now been there's a bit of a movement going on where people go hiking, like groups of black hikers go hiking together. But I mean, the fact that they have to go hiking together might be a bit of a clue, but like they safety in numbers. Yeah, like, I totally agree that safe space should be a thing both online and in real life. And also what's been said about, white people have to challenge other white people, completely agree. So yeah.
Dr. Washington.
Oh, that's great. No one calls me that. Thank you very much. I got my credential on today. That's been okay. I have 4 things to say. They may or may not be related. My kids are also bouncing out there, so there's noise.
Mine too. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. The first is that everyone has ancestors, which means that we all have ancestral traditions, which means that I encourage you, I invite you, implore you even to go and search out your own ancestral traditions so that you don't have to take other people's. 2 is that I want to, what's the word? It's more than an invitation. Beseech, beg Black people to not watch the Black death porn. Like, don't watch the images of violence. It's just re-traumatizing. And for white folks or non-Black folks, maybe watch it once and understand what happens and then let it go. Don't continue to watch it. Don't continue to normalize. We need to normalize like positive, we need to normalize images of living Black people, living, healthy, thriving Black people. That's number 2. spirituality and social justice go hand in hand, in that, as you were talking, Panda, about like the violence of the threats that you received, or having to do this work with this person and this crazy, audio that she sent you, and then basically being held to account for how you're reacting to racism, like all of that, like it sounds incredibly exhausting. And I think that this is a long fight. This is a long, protracted fight, and we have to really take care of ourselves. And so this is not a call to like go take a bath and get a pedicure, but really we need to really pour into ourselves and make time for our friends and our family and ourselves. Sleep, I think, is of the utmost importance, because we're going to continue to receive the threats. It's not like yours came in a very discrete form, like, oh, here's the threat, but we are always being threatened. And so we need to know that, understand that, and double down, triple down, 10 times down, dodeca down it down. I love that. Take care of ourselves, because we have to stay in this fight. We don't always have to be at the forefront as you are in this moment, but we have to be able to come back when other people get tired. And as our allies come and join us, like we can move back and forth, but we have to be able to take care of ourselves so that we can show up when we need to show up. That was 3. And then the fourth one is, oh no, that was the fourth one. The fourth one was take care of yourself. Great. Okay, I'm done.
Vivi, go for it.
Hey, my closing thoughts, just be wary of who you're asking to do emotional labor for you to understand some things. But if you're white passing, have white privilege, maybe ask someone else with white privilege, like, oh, I don't get this. And it seems like you are advocating for this. Can you explain it to me, right? And be wary of who you're asking to be patient, right? Like someone who is in an oppressed community shouldn't be the one who has to be patient with the person doing the oppressing. And especially, and if you're in the oppressive group asking someone to be patient and benefiting from them being patient, I don't know, just don't ask of that, right? And empathy too. The concept of narcissism can be passed down, right? And we have this like collective, I'm careful not, I know narcissism is a diagnosis, right? But there is a lack of empathy, right? There's a lack of, empathy can be learned. You can learn empathy, even when it's normalized not to be empathetic about certain things. So if like your go-to reaction is to be like, oh, I'm not racist, right? If that's your normal reaction, like maybe be observant of that, right? And then consider just looking at where this person's coming from. Who's saying that. Just look at it from their perspective. Like it's like you want them to look at it from your perspective. Cool. Why don't you do that? Look at it from their perspective, though. I don't know. Those are my closing thoughts.
First of all, I want to thank all of you guys for being here. I appreciate your wisdom and I appreciate your time and just all of you. We're all friends. And so for every interaction that I have, like that voicemail, I have 10 of you beautiful people that are just doing amazing work, doing real work, and are real friends. And I appreciate you, because it's not just a 20-minute message. Like, and it's not that for me, and it's not that for any other people of color. It's the possibility of being murdered in the street. I mean, it's big, it's real. And so when you guys do this work, it's so big and it's needed. And true spirituality is inherently anti-racist. It should be deeply rooted in eradicating racism. And so I appreciate you guys opening this conversation with me, and I appreciate just everything about it. And to everyone else, thank you guys for coming by, for stopping, and for all your support. I'm sorry about the technology problems. I will work on those and we'll get better on this. And I hope that we can continue these kind of conversations. So I hope that we can come back together at some point. If any of you guys would like to join us, definitely let me know. I just appreciate everyone. And once I get this video up, then I will put any learning materials underneath the video, and then I'll put everyone's information so you can connect with them on their different platforms. But also, Dr. Washington holds an amazing course that's built around ancestral healing and racial healing and ancestor restoration, which is, it's for people, all people, period. So I said what I said, and it's a really good resource. I ask you to look into it. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Now I will try to get us off of here. So like, nobody just stand up and take your shirt off, because we're probably still streaming, because I don't know how to like get out of here. So let's just try to click a few